The idea behind the terrain of Warhammer 40,000's 11th edition is that it is the narrative of the battle to capture parts of the battlefield that is area terrain. It's a merging of the competitive and the narrative, and that hasn't gone too well for Games Workshop in the past. Games Workshop has added more narrative things to the core rules before. In 6th edition, casualties were not chosen by the owner, but the closest models were killed in a more narrative fight. The people at the front get shot first. If the model with the flamethrower is at the front, they die first. If you drop in behind a unit where the character is and you use the Inferno pistols of the Seraphim to kill them, they die first. Also, you could deep strike 1 inch away from that addition, but not charge. That wasn't liked as a rule because you could lose the good weapons if the enemy maneuvered right, or if you didn't think about it when you were placing your unit on the table. So in more recent editions, the narrative and the competitive have been separated. You want to do Crusade? Do Crusade. If you want to play 40k like it's a competitive sport, here is your tournament pack. These are merged together again in 11th edition for better and worse. A lot of what we know about terrain in 11th edition has been speculation based on a small amount of existing information. Fair enough. That's what we do. That's what Games Workshop is hoping we do when they release articles a bit at a time. But now we get to pin down what terrain is a bit more. More of the questions are answered. There has been a worry when the terrain was shown off in their preview video, audio not available, that it was going to be featureless squares. Barely an improvement over objective circles, and weeks before that, I explained how terrain could get so much worse. Thankfully it doesn't look that bad, but I was prepared for it to be so. Terrain is going to get the biggest shake-up in what is otherwise a mild update to 40k's core rules. And it does fix some things that we have been complaining about for the past 3 years. Area terrain is obscuring. All area terrain. You can see into the terrain, you cannot see through it to the other side. Although the article says most terrain is obscuring much as it is today. But, Games Workshop? Most of it isn't in 10th edition. Only ruins are. And this was picked up as a very obvious problem 3 years ago. If you cannot hide your army, or most of your army, then it gets shot very quickly. Only ruins obscured, which made woods, hills, barricades, and battlefield debris near meaningless to include in 10th edition. Oh, the rules were there. You could if you wanted, but you're going to get shot. Now even the narrow barricade area terrain is obscuring. I'm assuming that the different colours on the map, the yellow and green terrain, is to indicate what can be moved through by vehicles. And the barricades look to take up the whole area of the terrain, so it appears to be you are on one side or the other. And if you're behind it, then it's assumed that you're keeping your head down. Unless you move right up to it, in which case you're in the terrain with the models that are in the terrain and they can shoot over it. That's a pretty good way to do barricades. At least these thin yellow barricades. Don't know what's happening with these big green barricades. We'll look at maps later. When you're in the area terrain, so not behind it, in it, you get the benefit of cover, and the benefit of cover is, as I already guessed, -1 to ballistic skill when you're shooting at enemies in cover. This way it can stack with any -1 to hit stratagems or abilities like stealth. The two of them are different, and they can stack. You cannot be more than -1 or +1 to a hit roll. We learned that in 8th edition. It's a very bad idea if the modifiers get too out of hand. Some armies just cannot shoot. -2, -3 to hit rolls were possible and relatively common in 8th edition, so you cannot modify a hit roll by more than -1. However, from the start of 10th edition, the idea has been, especially on Imperial Guard orders, +1 ballistic skill and +1 to hit are not the same thing. Changing the characteristic is not the same as modifying the dice roll. So if you normally hit on a 4+ and your ballistic skill is made worse, then actually you hit on a 5+. So you roll 3 dice for your attacks, and then you subtract 1 from all of the numbers that are there. So if you rolled a 4, 5, and a 6, the 4 is now a 3, the 5 is now a 4, the 6 is now a 5. And so only that former 6 is successful on your new 5+ ballistic skill. It's essentially -2 to the hit roll. With the assumption, again, that unmodified hit rolls of 6 are going to be automatic hits. So even orc shooting, hitting on a 5+ normally, with -1 ballistic skill, with -1 to hit, you're not trying to hit on 7s, a 6 will still be successful. Not everyone can get the benefit of cover. Infantry, swarms, and beasts can get the benefit of cover, not mounted units. Bike engines are not quiet, nor do the big things like monsters and vehicles ever seem to get the benefit of cover. They are big enough to be seen and shot at without penalty within area terrain. But they can still be hidden behind obscuring terrain. So if they're behind it, they can't be shot. If they're within it, you can shoot them without penalty. Games Workshop has also differentiated between the two types of terrain. There is area terrain and there are terrain features, but terrain features are the things you put on top of the area terrain. There doesn't seem to be any mention of like battlefield debris, just having a random statue out in the open. So there are things on the area terrain. A chessboard with different coloured squares, this is not. And Games Workshop appears to be very abstract on what is within these area terrain features and how much. Yeah, it could be rocks, it could be woods. Good, good. But why do we appear to have solid layouts on the map? I see lots of L-shaped ruins. Is that for the tournaments? For a specific Games Workshop product to go on? Is this an example of how you set up the terrain or an enforcement? That we don't know. From a comment in the article that even tournament layouts can have whatever features they like, no, these are not fixed. But we will come back to maps. As a counter to the basic benefit of cover, we have the Plunging Fire rule from 10th edition. But as with the 10th edition to the 11th edition change, this is not about armor penetration. You used to get +1 armor penetration from Plunging Fire. It is now about ballistic skill. And this time, you only need to be 3 inches up to get the benefit of Plunging Fire instead of 6 inches. So it is more likely to come up. Being on top of a bunker, on top of a hill, on the first floor of a ruin, even the older Games Workshop ruins, you will get +1 ballistic skill. That's nice. It appears to be on a model-to-model basis. So the models on the upper floors will get the benefit to their shots, the models on the ground floor won't. And the target unit only needs to have some models on the ground floor. Presumably within line of sight? But we don't know. Games Workshop not clarifying things like this has led to awkward situations in the past where, oh yeah, there's a unit in terrain, there's a unit out of terrain completely in the open. Because one model in the terrain couldn't see through a wall, then the people in the open get the benefit of cover. That was stupid. Potentially in 11th edition, if everyone is on the upper levels, but there's still one person outside the terrain that you can't even see, the attacking red unit could get the benefit of Plunging Fire on all of their attacks. How well it's worded is up to Games Workshop. The maybe less nice part of Plunging Fire: towering units get the +1 ballistic skill when shooting at enemies within 12 inches at ground level. Are you sure this is going to be a combat edition, everyone? I would expect that the points on towering units will go up from 10th edition to 11th edition unless they only had auto-hit flamer weapons or no ranged weapons. I would have also liked to see this rule on flyers. It would make sense. They're doing flying, strafing runs. They're shooting targets out in the open. That's the job of a fighter. Okay, so if you're behind terrain and area terrain is obscuring, then you cannot be shot. If you are within terrain, then you get the benefit of cover, which is -1 to enemies' ballistic skill when they're shooting at you. But also there is the hidden rule. We knew this was coming. It's like from 2nd edition and near identical to the rule I showed off in the Maelstrom campaign book. Infantry, beasts and swarm models inside a terrain feature are hidden as long as their unit didn't shoot in the current or preceding player turn, and so they will all be hidden at the start of the game. If they're hidden, they cannot be shot at over 15 inches. And if they can be shot at, they're targeted at -1 ballistic skill. So if you shot in your own turn, you are not hidden, you can be shot from any part of the board that can see you. If you fire Overwatch in your opponent's turn, you are no longer hidden, and fire can rain down upon them. This is again assuming that Overwatch is part of the game. It was in 2nd edition, and that seems to be part of the inspiration for this edition, this 11th edition. What we don't know, again it comes down to wording, what happens if a unit is not wholly within the terrain feature? Is there no hidden rule if a model is outside and can be seen? But if there are models outside the terrain, but one of them is behind the terrain, is that enough to stop the unit getting shot? As like 4 of the models are hidden and one of them is behind obscuring terrain? We don't know if that'll be enough to stop them getting shot. Depends on the wording of the rule. It's also interesting that this cherub model has a blue highlight around it as if it is a model rather than a token. I don't think we can read too much more into that. Now maps. Maps, terrain maps. In the current mission decks, in the seasonal mission decks that last a year that Games Workshop produces, the way it's done at the moment, you draw 1 of 6 terrain maps if you're playing a 1000 point game, 1 of 6 terrain maps that are basically the same if you're playing a 2000 point game, but the positioning of the objective markers is slightly different. There is also the asymmetrical missions. There are 6 asymmetrical layouts, which are really cool. Not enough people have played them. I'm saying terrain maps. These are not terrain maps, these are deployment maps. They tell you where you set up your units, it also tells you where you set up the objectives. In the new mission deck, the, let's call it Armageddon 11th edition mission deck, the location of terrain is shown on the map, as well as deployment, and some of those terrain features are the objectives. Well, now it seems regardless of point size, for each of the missions you play, there are 3 maps for each mission. The way you determine missions is you look at your force disposition, you compare it to your opponent's force disposition. This tells you what primary mission each of you have got. Having 3 maps means that at the very least, if you and a good friend always play the same armies, with the same detachments, with the same force dispositions, you will keep playing the same exact mission, but at least you can move terrain about so it's a little bit different. A little bit. It's still the same pieces of terrain. I'm expecting that there will be a limited number of maps overall, so not 45 maps, not 3 different maps for every possible combination of force disposition. The same ones will appear again and again, and they have familiar names. Hammer and Anvil, Crucible of Battle. So in a tournament event, once pairings are known, the board can be set up for the first game. After that, terrain may need to be rearranged, or organizers try to get people on the terrain to match their opponent, so some people may be playing on the same map over and over. Or you don't bother with this and say, okay, you're on table 3, play with whatever terrain is already laid out there. Because unlike the maps in 10th edition that Games Workshop made for tournaments in their tournament companion to be played at tournaments, these maps are for everyone. If you are using the mission deck, if you are using these missions, you use these terrain layouts. There was a comment on a previous article and repeated in this article that you could use terrain that matches your terrain collection. But if the area terrain is different, the game is very different to what is laid out here in these maps. It does affect victory conditions and the amount of points you can score. So here's a mission. We've seen this mission before. We now see the other side of that. But this is a take and hold mission. It's simpler on the other side. You take the area terrain that's marked as objectives. The ones that have the skull in them. The ones with the castle in them are home objectives. Part of it is scored at the end of your turn, so there's still value in taking objectives you can't hold, and then you get victory points in your command phase for holding it from last turn. Taking and holding, what a shock. You also score at the end of turn 5, regardless of going first or second. That makes the 5th turn worth it. If you went first, what you tended to do in your 5th turn was you scored your victory points immediately, and then you just go and kill the enemy to try and reduce their ability to score victory points at the end of their 5th turn. As both players, both the disruption player and the take and hold player, need to get to objectives, it makes the mission about getting into the middle of the board first. The disruption player wants to set traps, the take and hold player wants to take objectives before they are trapped. They get victory points and also prevent enemy victory points. How many victory points you can score will depend on the amount of terrain on the board. If there's 16 pieces, if there's 10 pieces, how many are within each deployment zone? The disruption player cannot trap terrain features within their own deployment zone. That will affect how many victory points they can score. Is the terrain symmetrical? If it isn't, that affects who can pull ahead in scoring. If it is symmetrical, aren't we reducing the narrative element? Ah, yes, the mirror forest, where every copse of trees has an identical and opposing piece of the same size. Every city street has been bombed in the same way on the other side of the street. You can't have it both ways. You can't have, oh yeah, you can use your own terrain. The terrain is the objective. You either play a narrative game that doesn't have this mission, but you don't have to follow the terrain map, or you play this mission with this exact terrain layout. And I think Games Workshop wants to come down on the buy our new terrain sets as sold by Games Workshop. I know some people will praise this. Oh yes, finally, every person is playing on exactly the same terrain all of the time. At least for this season, as long as this mission pack lasts, then maybe we'll have to buy new terrain. Then everyone will be playing on the same terrain again with the new mission pack. But I'm thinking, oh no, we might all end up playing on exactly the same terrain all of the time. I don't want that. The terrain deployment zones are the same as we're used to. 18 inches apart diagonally, 24 inches apart on the hammer and anvil map, the same as now. So boards are going to be the same size as they are now, 44 inches by 60 inches, so that Games Workshop can keep selling lots of kill team boards. There are big gaps at the back of each board that doesn't have any terrain, so if you had a 48-inch square board, you could cut off those 6-inch empty spaces and it still works. Not as initially intended, but it works. Now, what problems does it solve? Because Games Workshop doesn't do things randomly when it comes to the core rules. There is thought behind it. Sure, some of that is money. They sell terrain layouts to people who don't have access to cereal boxes, scissors, and a ruler. They want to temporarily undercut third-party sellers. And well, yes, they have announced there will be a card layout for sale. Expect that to be disgustingly expensive for some pieces of colored card. Maybe get one set, photocopy it a load of times, cut out those pieces, and then everyone has the same color copy pieces of the same size. All area terrain being obscuring means that you can deploy your forces relatively in the open. Having the hidden rule so you can't be shot over 15 inches, you can deploy in the terrain, and in theory not get shot in the first turn. Although with only 18 inches between you, the enemy can get within that 15 inches pretty quickly. It depends how aggressively they deployed. On the previous tournament maps, if objectives were on or under terrain, then maybe part of the area couldn't be seen. Or if it was only a 40mm marker only, then you get people measuring from what is under it to what should be under it to what is in range, and that can be difficult, and you have minor disagreements on if a model is in range or not. Having area terrain with a clear card footprint makes sense. With area terrain also being objectives, you don't have objectives behind line of sight blocking terrain, which is very hard for shooting armies to get to, and if there was big walls in the way, then it's hard to get round to. Looking at the maps, assuming you go for this amount of Games Workshop terrain and not a lot more, you'll be able to move around these terrain features a lot easier, especially if, as I assume, the yellow pieces of terrain can be moved over freely by tanks and monsters. The eyeball symbols are pretty common in previous terrain maps if you know them, so if it has an open eye, it's saying from the two pieces of adjacent terrain, you can see each other. Being on the left side of the big central ruin, you can see models on the right side of the big central ruin. If it's got a crossed out eye, it does not mean blind people are supported. It means that that green piece of terrain and the yellow piece of terrain, if you're in one, the other one is a separate terrain feature. You can see from the green terrain into the yellow terrain, but because they're separate, if something was behind the yellow terrain and you were in the green terrain, you cannot see through the yellow terrain. That's my understanding of what those symbols mean. So do we have enough terrain on these boards? Well, I've done the calculations. 25% or 24 and a bit percent of the board is terrain. It's 700 square inches of terrain out of 2,904 inches. That's been pretty standard for most of Games Workshop's suggestions on terrain for editions after edition. But it is like, if you take the current Games Workshop terrain layout and swap all the objectives 4 bits of terrain, that's about 16 pieces of terrain. That is dense, if not for the short barricades that block line of sight. I like these barricades, line of sight blocking, but they're not taking up too much space. What will be important is how much you can move around, especially with tanks larger than a rhino. Psychophages, land raiders, how do they move? If the terrain bits, the terrain features like a tree, like a ruin, can be moved because it's the area terrain that matters the most, okay, that makes it easier for things to move around and finish their move. I think that's unlikely, but what about people who have glued together buildings and glued that to card? You can't move that out of the way without removing the footprint. And if the rules work better without trees and ruined walls on the footprint, people will play with footprints alone, blank boards and a 2D abstraction of a battle. So much as Games Workshop says, yeah, you can use your own terrain, it's fine, buying the new Games Workshop terrain, making it so that that is really the only way you can play the game, and it to be balanced and fair, that appears to be the only way forward. Checkmate consumers. But I'm going to keep using my own terrain. Keep it roughly symmetrical, keep the number of terrain features about right. Just do whatever you can to have a great day of 40k.